It was 12:02 a.m. in Dallas when the video call connected, showing five faces from five time zones: Los Angeles, Singapore, Toronto, Dubai, and Sao Paulo. These were the five CEOs I had spent 27 years transforming from first-time contacts into trusted partners. We were less than 2 days from finalizing a $1.6 billion international supply chain agreement. In the center tile appeared Gregory Harlan, our newly appointed COO, leaning back in his leather chair like he owned the air we were breathing. Effective immediately, he said, "Your position is terminated." I scanned the other tiles, expecting at least a raised brow, maybe a quick objection. Nothing. Just steady, unreadable eyes, no applause for Gregory's decisive leadership, no sympathy for me. They were watching like market analysts tracking a sudden drop in futures. The glow from my desk lamp felt harsh, every contract draft and shipment schedule on my table painfully crisp. Dead center was my father's rehab invoice, 6 more months of treatment, a cost I could only cover with the performance bonus tied to this deal. The deal I had guided from its first brainstorming session in a Phoenix airport lounge to final legal review. The deal Gregory had just detonated with one smug announcement. He kept talking, shifting to his continuity plan, and how fresh leadership would carry the agreement across the finish line. His tone made bad news sound like a personal victory. Then I heard it. Buried in his HR scripted dismissal was a phrase, 12 exact words lifted straight from the retention clause in my contract. To anyone else, it was just legal boilerplate. To me, it was the master key to our execution system. That clause wasn't just about my employment status. Inside our architecture, those exact words carried a dual function. When spoken in the right, secure setting, they renewed all contracts linked to my account. But in the wrong context, especially during a public client call, they triggered an irreversible protocol voiding every pending contract I'd authored, including this $1.6 billion deal. Gregory thought he'd humiliated me in front of my most valuable clients. In reality, he'd just slammed the emergency brake on his own speeding train, and the passengers in Los Angeles, Singapore, Toronto, Dubai, and Sao Paulo all knew it. I stayed silent. The stillness was working for me. It had taken me nearly 3 decades to grow a $35 million regional freight firm into a name that could walk into any global boardroom without introduction. I'd been there for every overnight customs clearance, every high-stakes negotiation, every last-minute reroute that saved a launch. 137 major contracts, and not a single one had ever landed in court. That wasn't luck. It was the product of 27 years of stubborn work and an unshakable belief that trust still mattered. I learned early in my career that a handshake could carry weight if you made it mean something. I knew every CEO, every procurement director, every operations lead we partnered with, not just by title, but by how they took their coffee, the cadence of their email signatures, and what kept them awake at 3 in the morning. I built those relationships brick by brick. If a client's quarterly numbers were slipping, I was already in their inbox before they could draft a message. If a shipment was delayed halfway across the Pacific, I was tracking it before the alert hit their systems. My loyalty was never to quarterly profit margins. It was to the people who trusted me with theirs. That's why it still burns when I remember the morning I overheard Gregory Harlan boasting in the executive lounge that he alone had landed our $118 million logistics contract with a Toronto-based aerospace manufacturer. I could have corrected him in front of the entire leadership team. I didn't. Not because I agreed, but because I've never needed a room full of people to validate the work I know I've done. What Gregory never knew, and likely still doesn't, is that one of our most valuable clients, a household appliance giant in Brazil, was seconds away from walking away from their $88 million 8-year deal. Their CEO called me personally, voice shaking, to say he couldn't focus on negotiations because his teenage daughter had been detained overseas. Within hours, I had an attorney from my own network on a flight to her location. I stayed up all night coordinating with the embassy and arranging secure transport once she was released. The contract was signed 2 days later. No public acknowledgement, no extra bonus, just a quiet word from their CEO, "You saved more than my business." That deal still brings in almost 9% of the company's total revenue, the kind of number Gregory brags about during shareholder calls, completely unaware how close it came to disappearing. I'm proud of what I built. But pride changes flavor when you watch your work get repackaged, sold, and claimed by someone who would have let it all collapse if it didn't fit neatly into a quarterly slide deck. Gregory has always been the kind of leader obsessed with quick wins, even if it means skipping the groundwork that makes a win sustainable. To him, process is a nuisance. Caution is weakness, and due diligence is for people who can't close. I've spent my career doing the opposite, building stability by honoring every step, every agreement, every person involved. That difference had been simmering between us for months, and now it was about to boil over. Gregory had jumped straight into promising delivery dates and steep discounts, without even verifying if the client's back-end systems could handle the integration. I felt the shift immediately. The client's project manager raised a concern, and Gregory brushed it aside like it was a waste of his time. By the end of the hour, the atmosphere had cooled into polite formality. It took me 3 weeks of late-night calls, quiet reassurances, and technical walkthroughs to repair the damage. Gregory, of course, called it momentum. That was his style: polish the surface while letting the foundation rot. And now, standing on the edge of a $1.6 billion agreement, I could see him circling the same pattern again. But there was something different in his posture this time, a deliberate detachment, as though the deal itself wasn't his real goal. The answer came in the form of a discreet message from someone in operations. They owed me nothing but trusted me enough to take the risk. Gregory wasn't treating this contract as a win for the company. He was using it as his personal launchpad, a bargaining chip for an executive role at a much larger corporation. If you've been with me through this fight, stay close. The next part of my story will show just how far you can go when you take back the power they tried to steal. Subscribe, and we'll face it together. And part of his negotiation, streamlining leadership, which in plain English meant removing me. The heat I felt was sharp and controlled, not the wildfire of outrage, but the steady burn that tempers steel. Gregory wasn't just reckless. He was willing to gamble with trust I'd spent nearly 3 decades earning. With relationships I'd built in boardrooms, on shipping docks, and in quiet airport lounges long after midnight. I said nothing. Silence in moments like these is sharper than confrontation. If Gregory believed he could ride this deal into his next corner office while erasing me, he had underestimated the ground beneath his feet and the cracks already forming in it. Most assume the company's greatest asset was its portfolio of high-value contracts. They were wrong. The real crown jewel was the defense system I had built to protect them, a multi-layered architecture designed so no single breach could compromise the whole. Every contract's data was divided into 5 encrypted segments, each stored separately with one of our top clients. A single fragment was useless without the others. Once a year, the system required a renewal sequence and authentication only I could complete. It wasn't a password you could guess or a code you could steal. It was a living sentence set to be spoken in the exact cadence and context I'd determined when the system was born. To the untrained ear, meaningless. To the right audience at the right moment, it was the key. Gregory had never liked that control in my hands. Over dinner once, he'd joked the system was part Fort Knox, part bedtime story. I'd noticed how often Gregory's humor circled back to the system, how carefully he listened whenever I handled renewals. That told me everything he wanted access without me. What he didn't know, and what no one outside my small design team knew, was the insurance clause I'd built into its core. If the key phrase was ever spoken outside its intended setting, wrong room, wrong audience, wrong timing, the system didn't just deny access. It voided every active contract tied to it automatically and permanently. That safeguard came from hard lessons. Years ago, I'd watched a competitor lose billions when their CTO's password slipped during small talk at a trade show. I wasn't about to let our future hinge on luck or someone else's discretion. I'd built something stronger, something that demanded respect for process and precision. Now, standing across from Gregory in the glass-walled conference room, I caught the glint in his eyes as he steered the conversation toward system renewal. He thought he was subtle. He wasn't. I matched his pace, answering just enough to keep him thinking he was in control, all while steering the discussion into harmless territory. Quiet control isn't about winning a moment, it's about making sure the moment never becomes dangerous. Gregory didn't realize it yet, but the closer he edged toward the key, the more he was tightening the lock himself. He stood at the head of the long walnut conference table, his reflection sharp in the polished surface. 5 CEOs, each representing contracts worth hundreds of millions, sat spaced evenly along its length. They were people used to commanding rooms, but today, their eyes studied him, the way one might watch an unstable market. Effective immediately, Gregory announced, his voice swelling with the confidence of someone convinced the room was already his. There will be a change in leadership for your accounts. Emily Lawson will no longer be your primary liaison. I will be taking over all strategic negotiations moving forward. I didn't flinch. My chair was angled slightly away, just enough to keep my face out of his direct line of sight, while still reading every micro-expression in the room. No one applauded. No one smiled. The only sound was the faint hum of the recessed lights. One CEO, Alvarez, rolled a pen between his fingers. Another, Bennett, leaned back, arms folded. The air was still but not warm. Gregory either didn't notice or mistook the silence for respect. He smoothed his tailored lapel and continued. This transition ensures faster execution, no unnecessary steps, no bureaucratic delays. We'll streamline everything so you can focus on growth. Gregory smiled, the kind of smile that begged for validation. Still, the room stayed silent. Then he said it word for word, the exact 12 syllables that, when spoken in this precise sequence during a live client meeting, would trigger the deep security protocol I'd embedded years ago. And all engagements shall be consolidated under new authorization, he declared, his tone confident, oblivious to what he had just unleashed. I kept my expression neutral, even as I felt the silent hum of systems responding in the background. Somewhere, 5 independent servers, each holding a crucial fragment of our joint agreements, had executed a simultaneous lockdown. Every contract, every clause, every payment schedule tied to my account was now void pending reauthorization. The CEOs knew. I caught it in the faint tightening of their jaws, the sudden stillness in their posture. But they didn't move to stop him. They simply watched, letting the moment settle like dust on polished walnut. I sat back, hands loosely clasped, my gaze steady on Gregory's self-satisfied grin. He thought he'd made his announcement. What he didn't realize was that he'd just made mine without me speaking a word. A faint notification ping echoed in the silence. It might as well have been a gunshot. One by one, the phones and tablets in front of the 5 CEOs lit up with the same red banner: contract status inactive, immediate attention required. Gregory froze mid-sentence, laser pointer hovering in his hand. His brow furrowed for only a heartbeat before he forced his voice back into a show of confidence, as though nothing had happened. As I was saying, with these leadership changes, but the momentum was gone. The CEOs were no longer looking at him. Alvarez, seated closest to the head of the table, unlocked his tablet, eyes narrowing. Across from him, Bennett's gaze lifted just enough to meet Alvarez's in a silent exchange loaded with meaning. From Singapore, Tan adjusted his cufflink, scrolling through the alert with deliberate slowness, as though weighing each word. Beside him, Duarte from São Paulo leaned toward Tan's screen, his glasses catching the light as he read. I didn't move. My pen stayed capped in my notebook, hands steady. From where I sat, I could read the micro-reactions of people who almost never allowed themselves to display anything but control. It was rare watching certainty drain from a room. Gregory's voice tightened, pushing forward like sheer persistence could erase the doubt now circling him. These updates will position us to act faster, and Mr. Harlantan's voice cut through the air, calm but unyielding. Why does my contract now show as no longer valid? The others followed, sliding their devices forward like cards in a game none of them had agreed to play. I allowed myself the smallest inward breath, quiet satisfaction settling deep. This was exactly how I designed the trigger. No alarms, no dramatic crash. Just a silent shift only the right eyes would notice. And here they were, all noticing at once. Gregory's attempt at a laugh was thin, brittle. That must be a glitch. Our systems are secure, I'm sure. 5 separate contracts. Bennett said, his voice low but edged with steel. All inactive. At the same time. No one looked at me. They didn't need to. The silence already had a direction, and it was pointing away from Gregory. I kept my eyes on the table, letting the hum of the air conditioning fill the space between their questions and his scrambling replies. This was their moment to confront him, not mine to take credit. The satisfaction wasn't in being seen. It was in knowing the right people had just realized something was very wrong, and that I was the only one who could fix it. Later, Gregory stood at the polished oak podium in a packed Dallas press room, his voice carrying like he'd just saved the company from the brink. The technical issue has been fully resolved, he announced, pausing just long enough for cameras to flash and microphones to inch closer. All contracts remain intact. Our clients can rest assured there is no threat to the integrity of our agreements. The words rolled smoothly, rehearsed to perfection. Around the room, journalists scribbled notes, some nodding as if they'd been handed the headline they'd been waiting for. Behind them, screens looped glossy footage of smiling employees and busy offices, as though the crisis had never existed. Back at headquarters, the ripple effect was immediate. Traders who'd been dumping shares all morning slowed their sell-offs. The market's pulse, visible in green and red ticks, began to steady. Inside the building, employees who'd been bracing for layoffs let out visible sighs. Conversations that had been whispers grew louder, tinged with cautious optimism. Someone in marketing even popped open a bottle of champagne, the muted pop echoing faintly down the hall. I watched from the glass-walled mezzanine, leaning on the railing as though I had nowhere else to be. From up here, I could see relief settling over the floors below like a warm blanket. Keyboards clattered again, phones rang, shoulders relaxed. They believed him. But I knew better. Gregory's so-called fix wasn't a solution at all. It was a simulation. A shell program built to mimic contract verification without ever touching the real legal framework. Sure, it could trick the system into flashing a green active status. But under every jurisdiction that mattered, those agreements were still void. In the eyes of the law, they might as well have been printed on blank paper. All Gregory had bought was time, nothing more. From my vantage point on the mezzanine, I watched him leave the press room, shaking hands with board members who looked as though they'd just sidestepped a disaster. Tan Wei, the Singapore CEO, one of the 5 in the room when Gregory triggered the deactivation phrase, lingered a few steps back. His expression was unreadable, but when our eyes met across the polished expanse of the lobby, I wondered if he suspected the same truth I carried. Down below, a cluster of junior analysts laughed nervously, passing around a tablet showing the market's rebound graph. "We're back," one of them said, relief dripping from every syllable. I kept my arms folded, letting the scene wash over me without a change in expression. I could already see the cracks forming, executives avoiding my gaze, subtle hesitations in investor calls, the faint shadow of doubt behind the optimism. The market was calm for now, but it was the brittle calm that comes before a second storm. The one no one sees coming. Gregory believed the facade would hold. Everyone else wanted to believe it. And me, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth burned through every illusion he'd spun. The screen went dark the moment Gregory ended his next high-level call. His confident smile burned into my memory like a still frame from a losing hand. For a beat, the virtual boardroom was silent, the weight of unspoken thoughts heavy in the air. Then, one by one, the icons of the 5 CEOs flickered back to life. Not with Gregory, with me. Are we still on the secure line? Tan's voice was low, deliberate. Yes. I said, my voice steady and measured. This is direct. No company servers. Their faces shifted tension, giving way to something sharper: calculation. We've been waiting for this moment, said Clara Ruiz from Madrid, her dark eyes steady on mine. Said Clara Ruiz of Madrid, her dark eyes steady, unflinching. Gregory's announcement only confirmed what we've suspected for months. Suspected, I prompted, keeping my tone neutral even as my pulse began to climb. That his leadership is a liability. Lucas Graham from Toronto interjected. Deals wobble under him, promises vanish. The only thing holding us steady was the framework you built, Emily. Hearing it said so plainly was like feeling the tide shift beneath my feet. I take it you're not interested in renewing under the current management? I asked slowly. Not just not renewing, Tan Wei from Singapore replied. We're going to settle. This was it, the pivot point I'd been calculating for months. Clara leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. We want you. Your system. Your oversight. We'll follow you, wherever you choose to go next. In the corner tile, Henrik Voss from Oslo gave the faintest nod. Gregory thinks this collapse started today, he said. It didn't. He lost us long ago. We just needed a reason to walk away clean. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth, but I kept it contained. And now you have one. Yes, Henrik confirmed. His own arrogance gave it to us. The pause that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of decisions being made, of futures being quietly redrawn. I'll move quickly, I told them. Once we step out of their framework, we'll need airtight agreements. My structure will give you a level of security Gregory can't touch. Send us the draft, Clara said without hesitation. We'll sign within the week. It was almost anticlimactic how cleanly the shift happened. One moment, I was the woman they believed had been discarded. The next, I was the gravitational center pulling them into a new orbit. As the call ended, their trust lingered in my ears like a steady pulse. The power wasn't just back in my hands, it had been there all along, waiting for the right fracture in Gregory's facade. And now the crack was wide open. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet of my Dallas office settle around me. The city lights beyond my window blinked like slow, deliberate signals. I knew the next few days would be a blur: legal filings, new contracts, discreet handshakes in private conference rooms. But this wasn't uncharted territory. I had been preparing for this for years, laying the groundwork, one encrypted protocol, one loyal relationship at a time. Gregory thought he'd erased me. Instead, he had handed me the perfect opportunity to build something that was mine, untouchable and unshakable. And I intended to use it. The break was wide open now. This was no longer Gregory's game. It was mine. The news spread faster than I'd anticipated. By the next morning, every major business outlet had the same headlines splashed across their homepages: billion-dollar deal collapses, overnight horizon global in crisis. Television anchors dissected charts showing the company's stock plunging in real time, each downward tick, sending a visible shiver through the market. Within hours, the share price had lost nearly a third of its value. I sat at my kitchen table in Dallas, coffee in hand, scrolling through the coverage as though it were any ordinary morning. Most outlets chose the perfect photo: Gregory, jaw-clenched, sweat glistening under the conference lights from the previous day's press appearance, declaring the system fully functional just hours before the contract self-destructed. Inside the company, the false sense of relief had been replaced by outright panic. A former colleague texted me to say shareholders were in uproar demanding emergency meetings. Employees who had exhaled only yesterday now huddled in corners, whispering and trying to guess how many layoffs might come before the month's end. The media showed no mercy. Article after article dissected Gregory's leadership style, calling it reckless, arrogant, and dangerously out of touch with the technology that had once made Horizon Global a market leader. Analysts replayed his confident words from the press conference, comparing them side by side with the legal reality of the contracts now void. Commentators didn't just question his competence, they named him directly as the root cause of the disaster. And then came the twist I'd been waiting for. Late that afternoon, a special statement from the board of directors hit the wire. The phrasing was cold, legal, and deliberate. The board has determined that Mr. Gregory Harlan bears direct responsibility for the damages incurred due to breach of contract and will be held personally liable for compensation to affected partners. I read the line twice, letting it settle in. This wasn't just professional humiliation, this was financial ruin, the kind no public relations campaign could bury. The same man who had once sat across from me in sleek boardrooms dismissing my concerns with that practiced smirk now faced the reality of paying personally for the collapse he had tried so hard to pretend would never happen. I closed the news tab, the corners of my mouth lifting just slightly. I didn't need to celebrate publicly. The headlines, the board's statement, and the market's freefall were celebration enough. Gregory's fall was complete. And mine only just beginning. No one would know I was smiling as I closed my laptop. There was no need to gloat publicly. No need to send a message. The satisfaction came in silence, in knowing the sequence of events had unfolded exactly as it needed to. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the space between breaking news alerts and the quiet sip of coffee at your own kitchen table. 3 months later, I stood in the corner office of my own firm, a consultancy bearing my name etched into frosted glass. It wasn't just the space that felt different. It was the air itself. No more walking on eggshells. No more watching someone else claim credit for my work. No more wondering if the next boardroom meeting would be my last. The transition happened faster than I imagined. Within weeks of leaving Horizon Global, all 5 of my former major clients reached out. They'd read the headlines, connected the dots, and decided they'd rather place their trust in the woman who had built the system than the man who had destroyed it. Negotiations were clean, respectful, free from the politics that had poisoned my old office. Each contract was signed under my terms at my rates, with clauses ensuring my intellectual property stayed mine. Financially, the difference was staggering. But the real wealth came from ownership, the knowledge that every project carried my name, my signature, my vision. For the first time in years, I was treated as more than a replaceable cog. Clients valued my judgment, partners respected my boundaries. My schedule was mine to set, my decisions mine to defend. I had almost forgotten about Gregory until his name popped up in a trade journal. Rumor had it he'd been turned down by 3 major firms, each citing leadership incompatibility as their polite excuse. The corporate world was smaller than he liked to believe. Reputations traveled fast, especially the kind forged in public humiliation. Then came the irony no one could have scripted better. During a quarterly review with a new client's executive team, HR forwarded me a candidate profile. Gregory Harlan, applying for a senior role at the very company I now advised. His resume was polished, the bullet points crafted with care. But his name carried the weight of every headline that had shadowed him. The CEO, a sharp woman with a gift for understatement, glanced at the file, then at me. "I assume this is self-explanatory?" I simply nodded. The application went no further. A week later, she stopped by my office with a small wrapped box. Inside was a sleek brass plaque, "Never fire the one holding the key to your kingdom." I traced the letters, a slow smile forming. This wasn't loud cinematic revenge. It was better the quiet certainty that I had rebuilt stronger, while the man who underestimated me now knocked on doors I had the power to close. Freedom wasn't just leaving the past, it was standing in the present unshaken knowing I'd already won. If you've followed my story to this point, you know this wasn't just about contracts or corporate politics, it was about trust, dignity, and refusing to let someone else define my worth. I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever had someone try to take credit for your hard work or push you out when you were the one holding everything together? Share your experiences in the comments. Tell me how you stood your ground or how you wish you had. Your voice matters, and you never know who in this community might draw strength from your words. Here's the truth I've learned: success built on shortcuts, arrogance, and deception will always collapse under its own weight. But success built on integrity, preparation, and relationships will stand, even when the people in charge try to shake it. If there's one thing you take from my journey, let it be this: protect the value you create, document it, own it, and never hand over the keys to your kingdom without understanding exactly how they'll be used. If my story resonated with you, let me know. And if you want to hear more, subscribe so we can face the next chapter together.